Is niet aan het zijn.
Alright. Okay, so today I want to talk mostly about openness and openness in the software industry. Why is openness important? Well, I think you all realize that software companies are using open source. Companies are formed around open source, which is, I think, one of the more interesting parts. Well, you see me and my openness model, so I personally am interested in this. And you see that this market, this industry is changing rapidly in this openness aspect. And some of you have already realized that this means that pieces of software that were 1 million euros 10 years ago are now available for free. And that's one of the most important changes I think you could see in this industry. I might even underestimate or undervalue it in this course. In this course I should actually be talking maybe 3 or 4 lectures about open software, but of course, well, we don't have that kind of time. Alright, so this is a slide I stole from Michael Cusimano, always nice to open with. And what he looked at was Apple, Microsoft and Google. So free but not free, open but not open, closed but not closed. So why are these companies interesting? Because they all seem fairly closed. Well, as you start seeing these, you see that some aspects, as you can see also in my openness model, are in fact actually open. So let's see if we can find a nice example. So Apple is definitely closed because it's a very proprietary and mainly closed or tightly controlled platform. However, there are millions of people building apps for their iOS. Maybe not millions, but at least a couple 100,000. So, you know, that's how, is that closed or is that open? They allow you to change your experience on the iPhone. They keep you very strict. They don't want you to crash the iPhone of an end user, which with Android is a lot easier from what I hear. But, well, so there's a marketing genius who also, that's also very interesting. Lots of these companies, they share their vision constantly. So when Apple says, well, in 3 years' time we expect this and this and that, or Steve Ballmer does one of his crazy speeches, many people will listen to it and go, okay, if they're saying this, then I will jump in on that. So one of the things that Steve Ballmer at some point said, it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. He said that, what's that platform called again? The content management system of Microsoft? Azure? No, the SharePoint. So SharePoint, their CMS knowledge management system, he said, well, this is going to be the next big thing. CRM, they're making tons of money on that, and as are you, but SharePoint is going to be the next big thing. And because he shared that, he influenced the whole ecosystem to go into that direction. And now, as he predicted, it's making a lot of money. Maybe it was self-fulfilling, and maybe it was a platform that people actually need. Well, here you see some other things that are quite interesting. Also, Google, free but not free. And what's also interesting here is that you start to see sort of these changes in business models. So, well, Google is obviously a multi-sided market party. Microsoft has mobilized this huge ecosystem of partners, which is also, they've been very successful at that. I think that, well, I know that some of you are thinking negatively about Microsoft. I've used just now a Microsoft computer here and was very pissed off by it. However, one thing that they haven't really done well in an almost Apple-like quality manner is their partnering system, their resellers and things like that. Well, Apple, of course, we know, very strong brand. They can be as close as they want to, and all they have to open for is profit. So, well, they have that down pretty cool. All right, moving right along. So what do I want to talk about today? What is open source software? What are open source based business models? I talked about that a little bit before. Can anybody here mention an open source company?
Canonical.
Canonical? That was you?
Yeah.
Good, you are now on my radar. Well done. Yeah, no, Canonical is actually one of the better examples, a company that runs Ubuntu and everything around it. So if you look at the developer mailing list for Ubuntu, half the emails are at Canonical and half the emails are at Gmail, Hotmail, whatever, other companies. So it's really pretty cool. They're keeping this sort of open source platform alive. One thing that Canonical is doing, they develop a better version of the product, so to say, or an early version that they release for some money, and then after half a year or after a year, do you know how long?
No, I don't know.
Well, after a certain period, they open up the source code and they give it away for free. So they can make money for about a year. Another thing they make a lot of money on is support. You can get a support contract with them, or service contract for I think 400 euros already, and then you can call them any time of day and they'll try to answer your questions as soon as possible. So, good job. Other ones are of course Red Hat. I think so you should know Red Hat. And up-and-comers. Yeah, Mozilla is actually a very good example. Yeah, Mozilla is making a lot of money. I think I might have even mentioned it here. you know that Mozilla Firefox, they have the search box in there. They weren't really making a lot of money. They were making money from some small things and contributions and things like that. But then at some point they partnered with Google, and Google said, we will pay you this much per user per request. And all of a sudden the money started flowing in very, very quickly. If you remember, I showed you earlier a figure of how Google makes money. And in there it said how much money they spend on traffic acquisition, so to say. Well, that goes to companies or organizations like Mozilla. And for Mozilla, this was a bit of a culture shock, because all of a sudden they were making money and they needed to hire people with suits. And where do you go next from this? Did I mention Sugar CRM? Drupal, WordPress is a very interesting one. WordPress is by Automatic with a double M, because the guy who started the company is called Matt. So what are open organizations? Well, we know about that, and how do they affect business models? So this is something I was talking about very little already when I talked about Apple. Apple is very smart in opening up their business model, or not their business model, and opening up their software to create a business model. So they were the first one with their App Store, and their App Store has been hugely successful. And they're making a ton of money from that. So the 30%, and of course they learned this a little bit from iTunes, where also they skim a little bit off the top of every sale. So pretty clever way of doing that. But of course, the downside is if you open up way too far, you will make less profit. I think a company like Canonical will never reach Microsoft or Apple levels on a commercial basis. So Apple is going to be the first zillion company, or the first company that's worth more than, well, currently it's at about 450 million, I think. A billion? Yeah, billion. So it's the first, what's next after billion? Nobody knows? Neither do I. Well, yeah, 1,000 billion. A trillion? I think so. The first trillion company, that's the one I meant. Alright, so what's open source? Open source software is distributed with its source code. Well, that's pretty cool. Then you have the source code and you can do all kinds of things with it. But one thing that's of course really important, and you all know this, you could create open source software with a license that says it's open source, but you can't change it. Or as Android does it, we create open source software and you can change it and do with it whatever you want. But our next version will only be released once we're done with it. So whatever changes you make over the following year will not go into our branch, and our branch is going off into a whole different direction. Which guarantees for them quality software. They can say they're open, whereas actually, well, you could wonder how open they are. Yeah, so here it says, well, that's actually quite cool. There's a number of open source initiatives. There's the OSI and, well, a whole bunch of organizations that define what is open source. And I think Android, by some definitions, already sort of falls outside of the definition of open source. And I quite like that, because you want open source to be truly open. So here you see 10 points that are, I think, established by, I want to say OSI, but well, an organization that is an expert on this. So you can see, well, free redistribution. So if you get it, somebody else should be able to get it as well, without any limits on somebody being the wrong color or having the wrong operating system or whatever. Source code, of course, must include source codes, must allow distribution in source code as well as compiled form, blah 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 blah. Derived works, so that's an interesting one. So in the case of Android, you're allowed to make derived works. You're allowed to create your own tab device and then install it on there, so that you're good. Well, the question is, of course, so that's just about derivation. Well, integrity of the author's source code, so you should leave his copyright, so to say. You can change his code, but you should always attribute it to, okay, I had his original and then I ran with it. So here's again, no discrimination against persons or groups, no discrimination against field of endeavor. So you can't say, well, for this industry it's free, for this industry it's not free. And this, of course, these aren't laws. So if we look, for instance, at MySQL uses dual licensing. Dual licensing means if you use it in a commercial context that adheres to certain criteria, then you have to pay. If not, then you don't have to pay, then you're just a free developer. And that already sort of falls outside of this scope. So MySQL, as you might know, is now owned by Oracle, so they determine what happens to it. Distribution of license always has to be there. Must not be specific to a product, so the license stays with the code, whatever happens, even if you rename it or do something else to it. License must not restrict other software. So that's a very interesting one. In the case of GPL, of course, we all know that, well, if GPL code is delivered with the product, then all the other code is infected as well. So this is an interesting one. This kicks Richard Stallman against his sore leg. And the license must be technology neutral. So this is again, don't specifically target Windows as being the evil empire, because Apple by now should be just as evil. Alright, so some examples. Interesting. I think there's actually some GPL licenses here, but FreeBSD, OpenBSD, NetBSD, all based on the Berkeley Systems distribution of Unix. Darwin and Apple's macOS is based on this. But don't forget, based on it. So then it's obviously not the infectious license, because we can't get the source code of this. I think you all know Linux, right? There's not somebody here who goes, oh, you feel stupid not to raise your hand, but if you don't, ask me later. Alright, so more examples of open source software. I'm going to go through all this now, and I think most of these are familiar to you. Personally, I've used Apache a lot. Here it says, well, it runs over 50% of the world's web servers. It might still be true. I think HTTP is, does that come with it, or?
It comes with it.
It comes with it. Okay, so that's part of the team.
Yeah, Apache or IIS.
Yeah, no, so I'm confusing with Light HTTP. So Light HTTP is another one that's getting more and more popular, but Apache is still, I think, #1. Bind, let me see, SendMail, well, most important widely used email transport software, I'm not sure if that's still true. Mozilla, OpenSSL, pretty cool. Security software, open source, so whenever a bug is found, that can be changed really quickly. Well, some programming tools, I don't think there's any surprises here for you. Perl, Python, Ruby, Tcl/Tk. Zope and PHP are popular engines. I think that should be maybe the other way around. I think most of you know PHP. I don't think anyone knows here Zope. No? You're not missing anything. GNU compilers and tools. So this gets into the GPL area. So the infectious license. So is this open source? Is this not open source? Here we just put it this way because these are the most used. So these are, I think, important. Anybody here did computer science before? No. Yeah, you? Okay, so then you know that tools like Make and GNU and the compilers and Autoconf, Automake. Do you know those tools still from back in the day? Well, they're all open source, so you can change them if you want. Back in university, I had to change some of them myself. So here we go, OSI, I talked about that, opensource.org. Well, there's a whole bunch of other things. I'm actually missing some of the more important nowadays, so most of you may have known FreshMeat from back in the day. Nowadays it's more SourceForge, and if I say really nowadays, I should actually be talking about GitHub and Rails host or whatever, RubyGems, and there's a whole bunch of other companies that do open source hosting nowadays. It's pretty cool. I'm not sure if you ever used SourceForge, but I find it quite nice to see, on the one hand you have sort of this consumer type interface where you can see, oh, download our product now, and this is the documentation. And there's also a forum, and you get a lot of stuff for free if you're an open source developer and you just want to put your software out there. And the same is true for GitHub and all the other ones. Let me see. Well, you can check out some of these sites. Apache.org is of course a good one. What I find cool is that Apache used to be just a web server, but Apache went really, really far with all their product scope. So nowadays they're making all different kinds of software. They're making mostly web stuff like Apache Jackrabbit, which is sort of a multimedia content store, and a whole bunch of other things. Okay, so there's sort of a principle. One of the key papers in this area is the Cathedral and the Bazaar. So the Cathedral is, if you read the paper, you can just replace the Cathedral by Microsoft. And the Bazaar is more like open, and people can contribute to the software, or any kind of open software place. This is also a nice one, Linus's Law. So Linus is, of course, Linus Torvald, who started Linux. And he says, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So if enough people look at code, eventually, they're all going to find, so it's kind of using collective intelligence from all the users and all the programmers to find bugs. Treating your users as co-developers was actually my point. Rapid code improvement and effective debugging. So these are all, I think, have proven to be fairly true. And this is why I found it in the beginning quite surprising that security products are made by the open source community. But the more you think about it, the more you realize, like, hey, these are multiple people working on this. They all have different quality gates. So if you try to slip in like a nice, back door, then somebody's going to notice unless you're really good programmer because you're fooling some of the best programmers. So then maybe you deserve to win, so to say. This is the onion model. Do I call it that? No, I don't call it that. Well, this is the onion model. You'll see this in any paper that early paper about open source software. And yeah, it kind of makes sense. You have a group of core developers, you have maintainers, patchers, bug reporters, documenters, users. Well, the onion model can be as many layers as you want it to be, depending on how big your project is. With Eclipse, you can imagine there's ecosystem coordinators, there's a whole bunch of different people. But what's important is that you can sort of fight your way up or deeper into the onion. So if one of you wants to become a developer for Firefox, it's easier than you think. It can take maybe less than 1-2 years. So you'll start as a user, of course, then you become a documenter, then you fight your way through, you ask some smart questions in the mailing list, maybe you develop a nice plugin that's used a lot, like Firebug. And the closer you get to the maintainer point where you actually fix very important bugs, your mom's browser crashes and immediately you go, oh, I know what this is, and you fix it, you commit a patch, and quite soon you're approaching the core development level. And with every level, of course, comes more power. Of course, there's also people who are perfectly happy as documenters. Somebody has to write the Swahili manual for Firefox. So that could be, or Dutch, almost as exotic. So open source market trends. Well, all these numbers increased them by threefold because by now this is data from like 2005, 2006. IDC study, blah blah blah. Annual growth rate is 22.4%. Revenues approaching 8.1 billion. That's pretty interesting. So we're talking about real revenue here. Money is being made with this. A little bit worrying about this is that most of the money is being made in the States and most of the software is being built in Europe. So I don't know, either these guys are more commercial or they know better what's going on, or so guys, if you want to start, this is actually quite a good tip. If one of you wants to start a company, you could definitely start a company around Sugar CRM or one of those products. And you can compete all the sitting ducks like Business-Base, for instance. You can compete them out of the market pretty quickly because you can supply a product that's pretty damn good, get it for free or almost for peanuts. And quite soon also Sugar CRM is trying to expand internationally. So in the Netherlands, if you have a company of 20, 30 people, immediately you become a candidate for a takeover. And then it's cash in the pocket, Ferrari money. Alright, moving right along. So an increase in open source software acceptance by enterprise customers. So these large companies are thinking more and more about open source. So whereas it used to be de facto, you go to GX for your content management system, nowadays that's almost ludicrous. Nowadays if you start a website and you think, I want a nice website project, you call it Drupal implemented project. And Drupal is, it's for free on the web, you install it, and that's when the meter starts running. So then, but with GX, first you buy the license, and then the meter starts running, but the meter, you already have the license, which is already a lot of money. So you can see where the big difference is. Not saying anything bad about GX, but they too have to start thinking about changing their business model. Maybe they're going to go open source. So hybrid business models, well, we already talked about hybrid businesses being service and license companies.